Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Albo.
Mr. Speaker, I move to adopt the substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Substitute's agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, this bill deals with two sections regarding animals. The first is just a minor change. There's a section that says that if an animal is put in like a dog pound or animal shelter, when it's released, it has to be sterilized. The current enforcement punishment of that is only $50, and the people who came to me supporting this bill said that's like not even having a punishment at all. So this changes from $50 to $250. The part of the bill that may be controversial for some of you deals with the animal cruelty section of the code. And what the animal cruelty section says is, this section deals with the companion animals. So that's not a farm animal or a possum in the backyard. This deals with dogs and cats that are pets. And it says that the current law says that an owner shall provide for his companion animals adequate feed, water, shelter, veterinary care, to give you two or three. You can see them in the bill. Currently, the punishment for someone who has a dog on a chain in their backyard, who purposely does not give the dog water or food and just lets it sit there and starve to death, is a maximum $250 fine. What this bill does is it increases punishment from a max of $250 fine to a Class 2 misdemeanor, which would be $0 to $1,000 and or 0 days in jail up to 6 months. So it gives a judge a discretion in really bad cases to be able to give the person some jail. It doesn't mean the judge has to give jail. It doesn't mean the judge has to do anything. It just gives the judge the ability to give 0 to 6 months in jail if a person in an egregious situation absolutely refuses to give adequate water, care, shelter to a companion animal. I hope you pleasure the House to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Gentleman from Rockbridge, Mr. Klein.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield? Gentleman yields.
Who would determine what adequate veterinary care is?
A judge or a jury if the case went to a jury.
And who would bring the charge?
Gentleman would like to...
I'm sorry, would the gentleman yield for an additional question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, who would bring the charge for failure to provide adequate veterinary care?
My experience has been, at least in my county, animal control officers.
Gentleman yield for a further question.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, is that a subjective determination for each animal control officer? And would some treatments that may be more expensive than others be considered a violation of the law by that animal control officer?
Answer the gentleman, what you're asking me questions about is existing law that was passed a number of years ago. So the answer to your question, though, is yes, it's objective. What my bill does is takes the existing law and enables a judge in egregious circumstances to prescribe some jail. Because my personal opinion is that a person who owns a dog, has him in his backyard, and sits there and watches the thing starve to death and doesn't do anything about it, needs a couple of days in jail to teach him a lesson.
Mr. Speaker, further question.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the gentleman, would this allow a judge to jail a person who refuses to provide a costly medical procedure for an animal?
I answer the gentleman that would be a situation in which it could happen, but that's why you have judges. You'd hope that a judge who's appointed by this body would not give a person jail if the person was not providing veterinary care for an animal that he could not afford.
I thank the gentleman.
Thank you.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Manassas, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Speaker, would the patron rise for a question?
Will the gentleman rise and yield for a question?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, if the judge does have to find that the person is guilty under this new punishment, it is the case in this bill that it would be mandatory that the person spends 5 days in jail. I want to be clear on that.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, It's a good question. When we originally started this bill, it had a mandatory minimum of 5 days in jail, and for the reasons that the gentleman from outside Lynchburg, when I drove through his town, said that we didn't, after thinking about it more, we took the 5-day mandatory minimum out for exactly the reasons the gentleman had stated. So all this bill does is changes a punishment right now, which is $250, to a punishment that could range anywhere between $0 to $1,000 and 0 days in jail to 6 months at the judge's discretion.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Chair's in doubt. As many in favor of the motion will raise the right hand. Chair is no longer in doubt. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.